This is the story of Amorphia. There once was a blob named Amorphia. Amorphia was a perplexion. People around Amorphia would ask, "What is it?" Amorphia reminded them of a cloud, coming and going, boundaryless, colorless, sometimes dark, sometimes wispy. Amorphia would sometimes sigh, or seem to blush or laugh raucously. It must be a she. Did they like Amorphia? Did they have an opinion about her? Yes, it was a she. They didn't know what to think of her. In fact, they decided it was just safest to keep their distance from this mystification. When they did get close, she froze, hoping her motionless would deem her acceptable enough, or that her warbly laugh was cool enough. Amorphia couldn't figure what was wrong with her. She hoped to blend in. She hoped to rise above. Sometimes she felt downright discriminated against. Could she help her flighty or stormy weather? She was trying her darndest to fit in, but those dreams would vanish with a simple breeze. Then one day she met a healer. The healer did something peculiar. He took a number 2 pencil and outlined her into the form of a woman with arms and legs, a head, and a torso. How new this border felt! It seemed to contain her. As Amorphia walked down the street, people noticed her, and some people smiled at her. She must return to the healer for more. The healer grabbed his colored pencils and added a heart to her middle, a mind to her top, knees to her lower, and a glow to her border. As she departed that evening, she asked the healer what she could do before she came back to him again. He told her to decide what was in her heart, to define the contents of her mind, to bend her knees often, and to recognize the glow around other people's borders. She was ecstatic. This was so different than the amorphous living she'd known for so long. But it wasn't easy. She spent much time and attention at the mountain, feeling her definition and filling in the cracks. Others began talking to her like she had substance. So refreshing. Amorphia felt settled and grounded, her head out of the clouds. Back again to the healer. What would he give her this time? He took his permanent marker and drew a line in front of her like a wall, and gave her 2 pieces of instruction. You must determine who you are and keep it within your side of the line. Then you must decide everything you can possibly freely give without letting it cross your line, and give it to others. She spent the whole next week at the mountain deciding what belonged on each side of the permanent line. These were the phrases that encapsulated her side of the line. This is what I believe. This is what I prefer. I'm sorry, no. If you want it so bad, do it yourself. I can do this, but I can't do this. And what belonged on the people side? I'd be glad to help after I take care of my needs. Sure, my cup is full enough that I can freely give you this. I don't understand what you're going through, but I'm here for you. I know the healer is giving me enough to share of my abundance. I'd be delighted to share. Thank you. I appreciate your sharing so much. On her last trip to the healer, Amorphia wondered what the healer could possibly give her now. It was simple, and it was enough. With a red, sparkly gel pen, he wrote a new name, Amour. That's French for love. Well, let's talk about enmeshment. Enmeshment is a relationship between two or more people in which personal boundaries are permeable and unclear. This often happens on an emotional level in which two people feel each other's emotions, or when one person becomes emotionally escalated and the other person does as well. When one gets anxious or irritable, the other gets anxious and irritable, and so forth. Each person in an enmeshed relationship has little autonomy or self-government. They don't separate emotional experiences from each other. Emotional threads become interwoven. They're like two trees right next to each other. Imagine two apple trees standing side by side. Any fruit tree pruner will tell you these two trees will remain healthy if they are spaced apart enough and the branches are cut back to not rub against each other. But it makes sense to keep them close enough that they can share the same water source for their roots, and it's easier to pick the fruit in a well thought out space. They can be surrounded by their own little fences with flowers planted underneath, or not. Whatever works in each space is perfect for each tree. When the trees are too close and the branches chafe damagingly, both trees can become diseased from not having enough space, which in terms of marriage describes enmeshment. When the two trees are too far apart, they can't benefit from resources as well as act as separate entities. This is disengagement when they are too far apart in marriage. In a nutshell, their love is unripe, underdeveloped, unformed. So let's talk about some of the enmeshment causes and reactions. First of all, a cause of an enmeshment is people pleasing. You really want to make other people happy. And then the reaction to this people pleasing is giving up yourself. This is enabling. That means that someone else can do what they want because you are facilitating that happening, whether it's in your best interest or not. I remember my mom and dad went on a trip to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. So they went on this trip for 50 days to account for every year that they had been married. And when they got back and we were asking about all the experiences they'd had, my mom and dad explained that they had eaten oatmeal for breakfast and peanut butter and jelly sandwich for dinner all throughout Europe. And if I knew my mom, I thought, my mom growing up would not have done that. When we went to visit Plymouth Rock when I was a teenager growing up, she insisted that we buy a bowl of clam chowder so we could all get this experience. And all 7 kids were to get a bite. And now she's in Europe and she's not indulging in all the cuisine surely all around her. Well, she really wanted to please my dad, who is a pretty good penny pincher, and she didn't get to have any of the delights of the local cuisine, which I totally would do. So I kind of use that as an example of enmeshment when she just did everything she could to please him, even if that meant she had to provide those 2 meals a day of PBJ and oatmeal, whether she wanted to really or not. An enmeshment reaction can be passive aggressiveness. For example, when someone has to assert themselves in a forceful yet secretive way to let their voice be known, they may be enmeshed and have to assert themselves in this way to be able to identify themselves as separate from the other person. So this might come across as maybe a spouse gossiping about the other spouse because they can't really talk to the other person about what they need because they are enmeshed and they're just trying to make sure the other person is happy whether they are or not. Another enmeshment reaction is resentment and exhaustion. In any relationship, if a person is enmeshed, one tree will begin to feel stifled. If one is disengaged, the other will long for the connection of the other. Either can lead to resentment. Resentment can be either the person wishing the other person was not so close or wishing that the other person were closer. Resentment is an awesome tool to recognize violated boundaries. When you are enmeshed and too close to another person, you crowd their space because either you care more about their tree than yours for the benefit it will bring you, or you are desperate to be in their space because you are not enough alone. You can't love them and yourself equally, and both scenarios ultimately change and damage both of you. When the other tree blames you for things that are not your responsibility, like providing their happiness, another reaction may be guilt, like they are insisting you, quote, love them more than is really your responsibility. So use unhealthy guilt as an indicator that tree branches may be crossing. So an enmeshment cause is unaccountability, when someone just does not want to take accountability for their self and then they blame. So caring greatly about another person decreases your ability to care about yourself, and not caring enough about them isn't loving them as yourself. Remember that, loving your neighbor as yourself. So this becomes a loving imbalance. So you might ask, what's the difference between enmeshment and codependency? Well, in enmeshment, your identity is intertwined with the other's identity. In codependency, your focus is on the other person, so much so that your needs, goals, and interests are suppressed and ignored. You enable the other person to do things that are not in either of your best interest. And we'll talk more about codependency in a coming lesson. Caring greatly about another person decreases your ability to care as much about yourself, and not caring enough about them isn't loving them as yourself. Can you see that imbalance? So let's just do a little example, which I will call the enmeshment happiness cycle, and we're going to use Jill and Marcus as an example. These are real people, but names have been changed. So first of all, Jill is not supplying, that's in quotes, Marcus's needs. He thinks that she should be making him happy. Well, Jill can't really meet Marcus's needs because it's his stuff to take care of, but he still insists that she's not doing enough for him. Jill decides she'll just do what she wants to because no matter what she's tried to do, it hasn't made him happy. So she decides to do exactly what she wants to. Marcus doesn't like what Jill is doing now any more than what she once was. So she figures it's only going to work better if I do what I want, because he doesn't seem to like it either way, doing what he wants or doing what she wants. So then Jill really is taking care of herself. Finally, she is able to find herself. So Marcus has to choose how to meet his own needs, and that might include considering leaving. Jill continues to set and keep boundaries and seek for self-love, which is new and refreshing for her. Marcus is jealous of Jill, that she has found her own happiness and he hasn't. But you know what? She has to set the boundary that says, I will not apologize for my happiness, and I will continue to seek the best things for me. Well, Marcus can repeat the cycle. He can keep it going over and over, around and around. Or stop blaming Jill for her inadequacy, that's in quotes, for him, and he can take care of himself. I remember a time several years ago when I realized that my husband and I were stuck in this enmeshment trap. And we were going to the mall, and my husband wanted some new, longer shorts. When we got to the mall, I told him I was going to find some shoes for our third grade daughter and started to leave. He said he'd wait for me so I could help him find the shorts. I assured him he could find them himself, but he insisted that I be there. I felt torn in two places and didn't like this feeling that I was everyone's rescuer. I was starting to realize that it seemed to benefit me to rescue everyone. So I insisted that he could certainly pick out his own shorts, and I didn't say that I would later approve the purchase, I just let it stand. An hour later, he returned with not one, but two pairs of very nice long shorts on a decent sale that he has worn for years and years now. He was okay on his own, and I was okay not having the validation of being his rescuer. So I'd like you to do the sketchy phrases assignment. I'd like you to look over these next 4 points and think about what is erroneous about these statements. Here they are. I need you. You need me. You complete me. I am nothing without you. Does this sound like an 80s love song or what? Yeah, we hear it all the time in the love songs. So think about these questions and decide how they might relate to enmeshment. And then ask yourself, are you too close in a relationship? Are you too far? Or are you just right? And then ask your spouse, does your spouse agree? Okay, well, we will talk more in the next lesson about enmeshment and codependency and what to do about it. Well, let's talk about dependencies in marriage. My relatives crossed the plains as pioneers in the early 1800s. One story is told that my sixth great grandma would feed whatever Indians/Native Americans came her way. Her family had stopped their covered wagon in their journey across the plains and created a small dugout. One afternoon, a friend my grandma's family hadn't seen in a while stopped by, only to notice there were Indians milling around her house. This friend wondered if he should protect my grandma and her family, until he realized the Indians were rubbing their bellies with smiles on their faces. She told the friend that if you are good to the Indians, they will be good to you. It was just in their culture to take what they want, and they were just as giving. But I digress. And before I continue to talk about covered wagons, we need to talk about Cinderella and why a Cinderella relationship does not make your dreams come true. Cinderella hopes someone will save her from herself. Cinderella looks for a prince to rescue her. She's not okay just as she is. Her Prince Charming will take care of everything. Now admit, you've longed for your Prince Charming at some point, right? She can wholly depend on him, but not really on herself. Two people who stand firm in their own strength are more irresistible. They can make their wishes known to the other spouse, of course, but then they work on themselves, becoming someone desirable for the other spouse to be with. Oftentimes we do this opposite. We complain and we whine and we want other people to change, and they don't want to be around that kind of thing. So if we work on ourselves, then we become more desirable. And then just a little side note. Psychological dependency and good sex don't mix. So sex is not a place to be validated or to be given a sense of self and to be told that you're okay. You develop that on your own for strength, because validation kills true passion. Okay, so about those wagons and dependencies, we're going to talk about 4 types of dependencies. The first one is codependence. Now imagine this. 2 covered wagons meet up. Neither wagon knows what's inside the other one, but they hope it's good, because each other actually doesn't have enough. They limp along, leaning on each other. When one is removed, they both fall. They simply can't make it to the valley without further support. So take note on this one. Usually in a codependent dynamic, both spouses are codependent on each other. They marry who they are like. And if you don't agree or understand, think about it. Where do you lean on your spouse? Where does he lean back on you? And how could that show up really as codependence? The second kind of dependence is independence. This one we're going to call pioneer woman mode. She stalks her wagon so that she won't mooch off others. With fierce determination, fortitude, and resourcefulness, she makes it to the valley all by herself, and maybe her children, despite frostbit toes. But hey, she's going to do it. She's going to do it, man. She's getting there. Great example of this is Mary Fielding Smith, who has an awesome story about crossing the plains and getting to the valley before the people who told her she was never going to make it, but I'll let you look up that story. The third kind of dependence is dependence. So imagine here we have two wagons, and one wagon is severely lacking in supplies. These two wagons are not in a fair trade. The dependent traveler may have to go get help, regroup, and hopefully make it to the valley. And with this one, there's an understanding. We know sometimes in marriage, you are going to have someone who may just have to be dependent, like if they're in a wheelchair or, sicknesses and diseases, whatever may happen. But generally, too often, we become dependent on the other people and lack a sense of self or the stability within oneself to be able to be a good and desirable companion. And that's what we want to be. Is the fourth kind of dependence is interdependence. Both of these wagons are well stocked, and frankly, their journey would just be better together. So they go along, giving and taking happily, and enjoying the grub and dancing to the fiddle around the campfire at the end of a long day. This is the ideal dependency. So looking at these four wagons, where would you say you are? Codependence, where you're leaning on each other. Independence, where you're fiercely by yourself. You're that tree that can just be all right. You don't need anybody else. Third, dependence, where you really do just need someone else. You really just can't do it all alone. And then fourth, interdependence, where there is a give and take, equal dancing together. And then where would you say your spouse is? When I ask this question, what comes into my brain is, what about when the spouse doesn't agree with you? What if your spouse just wants a tighter forest where the trees are right next to each other, or to be a lone wolf in their cave, or a limping wagon because it's easier? Well, so what if you don't agree? What do you think? Well, ultimately, you can only control you. You can make yourself a desirable companion no matter how the other deems or esteems you or not. Now we are barring physical or emotional abuse, which is an ingredient of codependency, so be very careful there. You can reach out to God to normalize the difference between you. And if God instructs you that the union with your spouse isn't going to work, He'll let you know. Otherwise, you carry on working on you and praying for you both. The next thing we'll talk about is cleaving in marriage, and especially in a biblical sense. What does that mean? If we've been talking about being too close or too far, what does this really mean to cleave to one another in a marriage? Cleaving. Cleaving and a little bit of submitting is what we're going to be talking about next. So, as I looked into the definitions of cleaving, I was surprised to find they actually mean the opposite thing. So, we have dividing as if by a cutting blow. But cleaving also means to adhere firmly and closely or loyally. So one is to break apart and one is to adhere firmly and closely. Okay. So what does that mean when we read in Genesis 2:24 about Adam and Eve? Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So think about this. If it means to separate and to bring together, what really is that saying? Well, I pondered it a bunch and tried to make sense of which definition it would be, and I decided that it would be both. It would be both dividing and adhering. Well, how is that so? Well, think about a delicious pan of fresh baked rolls. Oh, can you imagine it? I don't know which is better, fresh baked rolls or chocolate. Oh, they're both so absolutely divinely delicious. And the smell of rolls, oh, out of this world, right? All right, well, think about it like this. To make those rolls, you have to start out with some dough. And you don't stick those dough rolls right close together, or you will have really fat, big squares. You divide them out into little circles that then have space to grow, and then they come together and look beautiful and are delicious. So in one sense, to be able to start making those rolls, you have to have individuation and autonomy. This is a cleaving apart. This is what we know as independency. Well, as they rise and you stick them into the oven and they come together, then we have that interdependency, which is more of a mutual reliance on each other. So you have both the independency, the individuation and autonomy, and the interdependency as you're coming together and cleaving, mutually reliant. Well, then we come along and we take that beautiful roll and break it apart and eat it, and who cares at that point if it's cleaved or not, right? So with that cleaving, what does that even mean then? So the way that I like to think of it is that if you left home and were about ready to get married, or however that situation happened for you, you have to be an individual first and cleave yourself into your own version of individuation and autonomy in order to wholly and completely come together with someone else to be able to cleave to them. Otherwise, you are setting yourself up for codependency, enmeshment, overgiving, and those things that are a byproduct of our not having been fully formed, of our not having cleaved yet. And then when you are able to come together with someone else as a whole individual, then you can cleave in the form of becoming interdependent. So now let's look at that scripture in Ephesians 5 that talks about submission, because I had a lot of questions about this myself. So it says in verse 22, "Wives, submit to yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband." Okay, so that's saying a lot. Let's make sense of that. So the way that I see it is that the woman submits to her husband as long as he is loving Christ. So as you look at this cycle, the wife submits to her husband. The husband submits to Christ, loving Christ and his wife. The wife reverences husband, and then it's back to the start of the cycle. Wife submits to husband, husband submits to Christ, loving Christ and wife, and she ends up loving husband and Christ more and feeling reverenced herself. It is a virtuous cycle. But what about when it's not? So if she submits to her husband and her husband does not submit to Christ, then she skips the husband and she instead submits directly to Christ during that time, or indefinitely, depending on how they decide to continue that marriage. She will continue to submit to Christ. If he isn't fulfilling the contract, she skips him and just goes straight to Christ. Does that make sense? Well, when I was learning, after being married for several decades, of how to find this individuation, this cleaving, meaning a separation, and this autonomy that I hadn't ever really fully developed, I had to figure out how I was really going to submit to my husband. And at that point, I wanted to say, hey, man, I'm submitting to Christ on my own. You're not part of this, because it had already been a hard thing for me to try to submit to him when sometimes he wasn't submitting to Christ, which is natural and normal. We are all not perfect, so we're not always going to be following Christ exactly. But I just wanted to go straight to Christ. And so I had an experience that helped me to understand how this submission works. So I was ballroom dancing with my husband one time, and we were learning the cha-cha, and we were kind of having a hard time of it. And I said, hey, just let me take the lead for a second and I'll show you how this step goes. And he goes, you take the lead? I'm like, yeah, just give me the lead for a second. And so we started dancing, and I started guiding him and leading him through the movements of my hands to his hands and body so that he could know what to do. And he was able to figure out the step because I was able to lead. And then I said, okay, I'm giving it back to you. And I thought, wait, what just happened? And I started to think about it, and I even asked the instructor, I said, so how am I supposed to know what he wants me to do as much? You know, I mean, I just felt it. But she said, well, it's really about him having a good, tight posture with you so that you know exactly what to do when you're dancing. So then I was like, okay, so there kind of does have to be a leader, because I just took over as the leader and then he took it back. Then I had another experience soon after that where I was playing in the symphony, and we had a percussion section that I was part of, and there were 3 of us at that time that were trying to divide up the music and who should do what for these symphony songs that we were going to prepare for the next concert. And I was trying to assert that I knew what I was doing and I wanted this song, and the other person was trying to assert that they knew what they were doing. And it was confusion, and we were all just being selfish and greedy and trying to grab for the part that was the best. And the next week, one of the ladies went up to the director of the symphony and said, we're kind of having a hard time here, and everyone's just sort of having a hard time knowing what to do. And he said, well, how about this? I'll make you the section leader, and then everyone else just does what you said. And when he said that, at first I thought, wait, what if I want to be the section leader? But then I thought, no, he's given us the assignment of who's the section leader, and I'm just going to obey her. So the section leader said, well, let's make sure that everyone's happy and everyone gets the various instruments at least once so that we can all have all the fun at all the instruments. And I was like, yeah, I like this. And suddenly we were all just so congenial and hoping that everyone had all the parts that they wanted. It was awesome. Think about a company too, where you have like this CEO. He might have his board, he or she might have the board underneath him or her, but they are the final decision maker. So God has just assigned us, like the symphony director. Okay, the man's going to be in charge and the woman's going to submit to the man. Now, why is it that the woman submits to the man and the other way around? I don't know why, but it's the way God commands. He's given us the section leader. He's making it easy for us. So I hope that makes sense, because when I finally started to realize that, I'm like, I'm okay with that. And as long as he's loving Christ and submitting to Christ, I can totally submit to him. And I can still check in with Christ. Of course I'm going to. But the final say will be with my husband, just because God said so. And that's just the way it is, right? All right. Well, next time we're going to talk about overgiving. So I'll see you there. Overgiving. This is the term that I put to a whole host of descriptors that include codependency, enmeshment, and overdependency. All these things I put together into the term overgiving, because ultimately that's what it is. So if you look at this picture on this slide, look at this woman and this man who are practically wearing the same shirts. Remember when I talked about enmeshment? I mean, this is really a good case of enmeshment, of where you don't know where one starts and where the other ends. Well, let me tell you how I came to know that I was overgiving. Well, first of all, there was a lot of resentment. I had to stop and say, man, why am I being so resentful for any time I tried to give anything to anyone? I'm just trying to be Christ-like, right? Well, one way that I could tell that I had just been pushed too far, or pushed myself really is what I did. I pushed myself too far, was that I was getting extremely bothered by other people chewing food, chewing gum. This is what they call misophonia, where you have an extra sensitivity to sound. So here's the interesting part of this. If there were random people chewing like food at a restaurant or gum on a bus, I would almost think it was comical. Oh, isn't that funny? Listen to their chewing, especially if they were really obnoxious in their chewing. And we had a rabbit who would chew and munch its little dandelion weeds that we would give it. And I thought, oh, isn't that cute? But the people that I was giving to, my husband and my children, were the people I could not handle their chewing. The people who could handle themselves perfectly, without me, I was okay. But these people who were depending on me, I was so annoyed. And it still bothers me, and I'm still working through it. But I know that those are the people that I have to be really careful to say, hey, I am not going to overdo it. And I know that I got to take care of myself in those kind of times. So what are some of these overgiving characteristics? Well, see how many of these characteristics you match. You are responsible. You are controlling. I mean, in a way that feels like you're just taking care of things. You always say yes. Very rarely do you say no. It's not a good thing to make mistakes, so you just do anything in your power to not make mistakes, even if that means not doing something. You feel like you are a worthwhile person, that you have worth when you're helping. You value busyness. That is like a badge of honor. You are happy outside yourself. Your locus of control is outside yourself. You are always trying to prove you are good enough. You often feel angry, hurt, and used, and you don't know why, so you just kind of shove it down. You play the blame, shame game, and this one's really hard to tell because it really lurks in hidden places that's kind of hard to tell. You are a caretaker, which caretaking kills passion. So it makes you a duty giver, someone who is doing things based on duty. You're indecisive. It's hard to make decisions. You're a fixer, a solution finder. You laugh instead of cry. You find yourself withdrawn and numb. You're cryptic, not so very honest, even though you'd like to say you're honest, but you're passive aggressive. You feel that you really have no rights and no real freedom, though you know you should. So how many of these can you identify with? If you can identify with a bunch of these, you're probably an overgiver. So keep listening. Well, we read in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 and 5. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil. And now abideth faith, hope, and charity. These three, but the greatest of these is charity. And when I read that scripture, it makes me think, well, I need to be like Christ. I need to give up all these things, and I need to be not provoked, and I need to have hope and not be puffed up. So what can I do to be like Christ? So my answer is serving other people. Well, Matthew 25:40 says, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. So that means serve, right? Also in Matthew chapter 16:25 says, whosoever will lose his life shall find it. But here's what I found after a lot of overgiving. We often forget, for my sake, for Christ's sake, he who loses his life shall find it, for Christ's sake. It drastically changes how one serves. When you're in the service of your fellow beings, you're only in the service of your God. And I heard another lady say, observe and serve. These are the kinds of things that led me to believe that I just had to just give and give and give, and I would be rewarded, if not today or tomorrow or in 10 years, at least in the afterlife, my eternal reward. But it was not doing me good here and now. So I started to think through some of the things that we deem as Christlike that might perpetuate this overgiving. So I've got a list here, and I want you to think. Have you ever thought about these things and how maybe we misconstrue these Christ-like characteristics? Is obedience really loving man first? Is kindness done out of fear, not love? Is your honesty really avoiding truth? Is sacrificing really enabling? Is turning the other cheek really avoiding solutions? Is loving your enemy really generating and inviting suffering? Is long-suffering really enduring while losing self? Is serving your family turning into martyrdom? Is agency, in quotes, and freedom really maintaining control at all costs? Is serving really inviting depletion and burnout? Is avoiding carnality really a catalyst for judging unrighteously? Is self-reliance really rejecting help? Is meekness really people-pleasing submission to others? Is peacemaking really peacekeeping? Is agreeableness really having no backbone? Is forgiveness really premature trusting? Is trusting really having no boundaries? Is safety really control? Is courage really resistance to self-compassion? Is faith really an excuse for inaction? Is patience really continual tolerance? Is being responsible really overextending? Is selflessness not being self-full? Is committed really indulging others or rescuing them? Is not judging others really blindedness to the truth? Is mourning with those who mourn really victimizing? Is putting others' happiness over mine really enmeshment and a loving imbalance? Is inspired selfish and indulgent? Is over-relying on God really unprocessed emotional issues? Is blessed really an imbalance in giving and receiving? Is connecting and cleaving really unhealthy bonding? Is exact keeping of God's commandments scrupulosity or feeling like you can never do good enough? Is perfection unrighteous control and judging of self and others? Is Christ-like even possible if Christ was half God? I asked myself these questions and delved into them to try to figure out what the answer was to how to be Christ-like. And I came to two very simple answers. First of all, love God first. You must know Him and His power to know yourself. You must trust Him with faith. This is easier said than done. Secondly, you must love your neighbor or your spouse as yourself. You must know yourself to be able to know and love others. You must know your rights and what you are capable of having because you are you. And you must have self-compassion, which again is much easier said than done. Very simple things, but once you start to incorporate it into your life, am I loving God first? Am I loving my spouse as myself? Then you begin to see where you have not been taking care of yourself as well. And so you overgive. Many reasons why we overgive, but it comes down to these two things. So there are 4 points to loving your spouse as yourself. At least that I'm going to cover right now. First of all, what does the Holy Spirit whisper despite what everyone around you says about how to love your spouse as yourself? Secondly, what does your inner wisdom or your inner voice say about it? Sometimes that can be hard to know, that especially if you've been an overgiver or enmeshed or in codependency, it's really hard to know what that voice is. And it takes some practice and some patience to actually be able to hear that voice. Third, does it benefit the whole, even if it feels selfish because you end up taking care of yourself? And fourth, are safety issues or defensiveness issues stopping you from truly loving? There's a lot more to say about this, but that is what we'll keep it down to for now. So, when you think about being Christ-like and how it relates to overgiving, well, Christ grew from grace to grace. And He received not of the fullness at first, but continued from grace to grace until He received a fullness. That's from the Doctrine and Covenants. To gain charity, you must draw closer to God in His infinite grace and your efforts. So, when you are in line with the Lord, your spiritual vibration increases. When you are aligned with the Lord, your spouse has to decide to meet up at the same place. Well, there are a few other things that I can list that we have done and I have done to be able to keep my spirit in line with God's spirit so that I can love my spouse and not overgive. So, some of those things are learning let go techniques, which is just not having to be so in control of everything as much as you want to be, and to be able to handle when something's not going your way, and to be able to have that self compassion that you need. This may include therapy, empowerment techniques that make you feel better and like you can take care of yourself, that you don't have to be overgiving to other people, you can give to yourself too. Declarations about who you are and visualizations about what you want to be and become. Healthy food, supplements, exercise, being out in nature. Nature is a wonderful stabilizer and is just giving and accepting and loving. Smells. So using the senses. Sometimes those smells can ground us and take us where we want to be able to give to ourselves and to be more loving. We can recognize and eliminate the adversary in our lives, because the adversary totally wants us to forget about ourselves. And then we start to get another huge imbalance in many ways. Decluttering. When you're decluttering, you are letting your mind be less cluttered. Serving with balance. So this is learning how to say yes to this thing and definitely no to this other thing. I've heard someone say, it's got to be a heck yes. If it's going to be a yes, it better be a heck yes. Otherwise, it's a no. Decreasing fear or unsafety issues, which is a whole nother class that I have done. Let's see, I covered this in class 7 about changing your thoughts to create mental safety. Keeping in your own energy, and that's actually a really big one, because if you are in someone else's energy, you're really going to overgive because you are like, it's in you're in their brain and in their thoughts. So it's really important to not be in their brain and in their own thoughts. Be in your thoughts so that you can know how to give to yourself. Listening to good music, laughter, rejuvenation, having a passion project. These classes are my passion project because they're what I love to do, and they keep me going, and they feel like they're something that takes a lot of help from above and that really push me. And having a passion project really makes you excited about life, and that way you are giving to yourself. Meditation and mindfulness, which I do every day. Getting outside support. We don't have to be a lone island. God blesses us through others. Choosing useful thoughts and helpful worshiping habits that keep you close to God. And then what else keeps your spirit in alignment with God's spirit? What else can you think of? Pause for a second and think, what do I do to keep my spirit in alignment with myself, with God, with my spouse, so that everything is in a good balance? Well, ultimately, learning to love yourself and others is really increased discipleship to Christ. So it's kind of like a no-brainer when you learn how to strike that happy balance. I would like you to take a pledge. I promise to, this is your promise to yourself, I will love myself more today by fill in the blank. One thing that you could do today to love yourself more. And secondly, I will love God more today by fill in the blank. How will you love those both in your life more so that you don't fall into the trap of overgiving and then have all the side effects of overgiving? I know that you can find happiness when you are able to give back to yourself. So I hope that this has been helpful to you. And the next thing we will talk about is a really cool concept, differentiation. Well, my university degree is in business. And as a side note, my business is marriage growth. In my Salesforce management classes, we learned about 2 strategies a business can use First of all, there's the competitive or integration, or differentiation, which is diversification. So let me explain the two. Integration means keeping the association between the consumer and the brand relevant and simple. So integration is competitive. Differentiation provides a customer with something unique, different and distinct from items their competitors might offer. So differentiation is diversification. Remember those rolls and cleaving? I can smell them right now. Well, remember how we started with the rolls in dough form having developed fully, individually, then to be placed by the next roll so that when the rising and blossoming and coming together happens in baking, they snuggle together with the next roll. Then we pull the roll apart from the next roll, gaze at its beauty, salivate, remember the butter to smother on it, and eat it. And I'm going to liken the beauty of that single roll in its finished baked form to the idea of differentiation. That roll on its delicious own is unique, wonderful, and true to itself. It can't be replicated exactly as it is anywhere else. I guess you could say like a snowflake. And it's valuable to the consumer, the one who consumes rolls. Yum yum. When my only daughter turned 8 years old, she asked for a customized keepsake locket we saw at a holiday boutique. It was rather expensive and I just couldn't quite pay for it. But I found a much cheaper version online. With a cheaper version, I could add more fillers and still pay much less. And it had a rose gold version, which I was rather fond of. So I bought us both the cheaper version and have loved it. You can see it right here. Here is the keepsake locket that is customizable. You can open this little door and then you can put whatever little emblems you want into it and you can change it out. But I've never changed mine out because these really typify who I am. So there's a Super S shield, kind of like Superman, but it's for me, Shirella. A couple of music notes, a diamond butterfly, a volleyball, a heart that says mom, and then this little plate that fills the back with the words forever family. And I love my necklace. Well, let's go through and talk about the difference between the integration and the differentiation. So we're going to do a SWOT analysis, which is what I learned in my business classes. And the SWOT, S-W-O-T, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So what are the advantages of integration or being competitive? Well, it's low cost. You have bulk opportunities. This is done in a way that appeals to the masses. There's a higher pool of customers, everyone against everyone. We're talking Walmart, Amazon, huge car dealership. And the goal is to please the masses and to have the processes streamlined. And you're able to keep things relatively straight across the board. You can't easily monopolize or hijack these kind of companies. So what are the problems with integration or being competitive this way? Well, three main problems. It's not specific, it's pretty generic. You just kind of take what they have. It's a lower value because you have so much in the form of manufacturing and the demand is so high that people can be competitive. And then the customer service is less because you have more people needing help, and so you're not going to get quite the help that you want. All right, let's move now to this is differentiation and the SWOT analysis on the advantages and disadvantages. So the advantages of differentiation are we cater to the individual specifically. So this is the brand keepsake locket versus the generic locket that I was able to buy. This might even be like marriage therapy versus specific therapy. I find that as it gets more personalized, more streamlined in therapy, it costs more. This is specialized types of anything that gets more expensive. You know what I'm talking about. Well, there's less staffing to pay for because the demand is lower, but then you do have to pay your staff well because they're going to be customizing things for people. These things have a higher value because there's lower supplies and manufacturing capacity, which means it's higher cost to make it custom. In differentiation, you are pleasing the connoisseur who generally has money, and it can be highly satisfying for both the customer and the employees of that company. So what are the problems with differentiation? Well, obviously, it's more expensive and it's more difficult to manage and get the items, and the value can decline, such as depending on what's trending, the demand, bad press, and so forth. So for example, let's look at cubic zirconia versus diamond. So I found online that you can get a 1 carat round cubic zirconia engagement ring selling for $13.99. Woo! While a similar 1 carat diamond engagement ring from James Allen that's well cut goes for $3,630. That's 285 times more money. 285 times more money to get the real diamond well cut versus the cubic zirconia. Okay, so there is quite a difference there. And the cubic zirconia is pretty much just cut plastic, but you know, it can really fake other people out. They might think it's a real diamond, but it's easy to come by. It's something you can easily find at Walmart, and you're not even going to have to pass those when you pass through the scan thing to see if you're stealing something, it probably won't even go off, right? Okay, so now let's compare. This is the fun part. We're going to compare integrated versus differentiated in marriage. Okay, so the marriage advantages of integration. You are low cost, dumped on someone to be looked over. There's a higher pool of customers. There's more people like you, and you have to be everywhere, spread thin. You are the same face among millions. You please and appeal to the masses. Your people pleaser processes are streamlined. You are low maintenance. You keep things relatively straight across the board, run of the mill. No one will be vying for your attention. Do you ever feel like this? In a nutshell, you are easy, easy to cater to, care for, and count on. I have been here, have you? Okay, now here's the marriage problems with integration. You are not specific. Your face is a million in a million. You have a lower value. You perceive yourself as less valuable, though honestly, we're all worth the same. So this is just the perception of it. The customer service is less. You clean up the messes and less people take care of you. You just exist. Gray, lifeless, formless. So marriage problems with differentiation. Well, you are more expensive. You can be more difficult to cater to. Your happiness hits are harder to acquire. In other words, those are the ways that you find happiness. You can be labeled a nag. If you'll notice, these are the same things that I just talked about in just a general product. So to be pleased, you need more attention, which can become demanding. When not done right, your perceived value can decline, depending on what's trending, keeping up with the partner's likes, the demand needed. Are you needed or are you baggage? Bad press, like gossiping to or from you, complaints to or from you. In a nutshell, you are high maintenance. But now let's look at the marriage advantages of differentiation. You get catered to specifically. You are 1 in a million, trillion, the universe. You are specifically you. Can you see how that'd be really gratifying in a marriage? There is less staffing to pay for. You don't need to reach out far for what you need. You are containable when satisfied. You have perceived higher value, custom, unique. Your needs and wants are provided for, even if simply by your own mindset. You please the connoisseur, who in this case is your husband. You are customized specifically for him and him for you. And take that for what it's worth, not that, you can only be for each other, but in the marriage situation, that is the ideal. You can be highly satisfying for both you and your husband, a priceless gem. So, with differentiation, you are true to yourself, you are true to your husband, and you are true to the marriage. With integration and interdependency, you come together as two complete wholes. Now, with dependency, there is a reliance on each other. Otherwise, why do you get married? And then you also have your own autonomy, which is working on your own, but it benefits the whole. So it's like a solar system as opposed to a solitary planet. And you meet in the middle at that prized union. Can you see that place in the middle that just looks happy, doesn't it? All of those pieces coming together in a happy marriage. But what happens when you have too much differentiation or too much integration, as you can see on these pictures here, with too much differentiation and autonomy, you find separation in marriage. You lose marriage. We even lose our marriage with dependency because either it drives the other spouse away, even to divorce because it's too clingy, or it's not a marriage as in a healthy coming together, and it becomes more of a duty and an oversupplying, which becomes managing. Too much integration and dependency on the other side brings suffocation or losing yourself. So one is losing the marriage because it's too far apart, and one comes together too closely, and that is suffocation. So it is uh, a happy place to have to find. So look again at the healthy differentiation and integration, melding at that prized union in the middle, where you are true to yourself, to your spouse, and to the marriage, where you come together as two complete wholes, where you have reliance on one another, yet you are working on your own, benefiting the whole. The solar system, just not a planet, a solitary planet. So here's my representation of diamonds in a locket keepsake necklace, kind of like my little necklace here. So it's like a kind of like my representation, I guess, my best way to picture this. So differentiation as a couple means you are okay with who you are as a couple. You are true to yourself. You are true to your spouse. You are true to your spouse's truth to himself. And in other words, you're not controlling. You are true to your spouse's truth to you, bitter as it may be. So if your spouse really needs to be truthful to you and you're not letting them, then he can't be truthful if you say, don't lie to me, and he does lie because he doesn't want to make you mad. But his truth to you can be hard, but it's really what makes you become closer. And then the truth of us and what it takes to bind us together with integrity. Those are the little parts. Those little diamonds are inside the keepsake necklace that make it all come together with differentiation. Well, the other day, my husband asked if I wanted to go to a ball game. And before I could answer, he said, I know you don't really want to go to a ball game with me. All you want to do is kick back and read a book. So at first I was internally defensive, like I should want to go to the game with him. And sometimes I do go to the game with him. And then he kind of looked at me like, I'm right, aren't I? So then I said, actually, you're right. I would rather stay home and read a book on this at this time. I'll go with you another time, but I really don't want to go this time. So he knew me. And that is such a far cry from a time when we had planned an Alaskan cruise several years ago, and my husband really wanted to go fish. And I said to him, great, you go fish. You pay the hundreds of dollars to have someone help you fish, and I will sit back and read a book. And he's like, no, I want you fishing with me too. I was like, no, I am totally happy reading a book. And he says, you cannot be happy reading a book. And I said, I am much happier to read a book than to pay the hundreds of dollars to have someone guide me how to catch a fish that I probably won't catch. And I would just love to kick back and just look all around me at the scenery and the beauty, and you catching fish, that would just make me happy. Well, we just could not come to collaboration with that at all. And we went on our cruise and we just kind of did these little side tours, and we didn't do what either of us really wanted to do until the last day. It was actually the day before we came back, and I just said, I want to go read my book. So I climbed to the very highest point of that cruise ship and I took a book and I just read the book, and oh, it was such a delightful time. I looked out the window and the sea was just like glass with the sunset sparkling off of it. It was one of those moments of autonomy and just loving, living, and I remember that as being a good experience, but I also remember thinking he didn't get a fish. Now, he did go back later and fish with his brothers, and they caught huge halibut and cod and king salmon and all sorts of awesome things. So it ended up okay, but at that time, we couldn't come to a consensus of how to spend our time on that cruise because we didn't really know each other and we were afraid of offending each other and controlling each other. Well, we've come a long ways when he could say, I know you'd rather just read a book, and really mean, and it was okay. He was able to know my truth, understand his truth, and how my truth wasn't linked to his. It was just me. And I could say, yep, you're exactly right. I'd rather kick back and read a book, and I love you. Much like Michelangelo, who painted thousands of details on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, our Heavenly Father has embedded innumerable divine details in our DNA that compose a stunning picture of who we really are. That's a quote by Hannah DeTavis that reminds me that we really are this stunning, unique diamond that we can enhance and accentuate in the uniqueness and beauty of who we are. So you aren't an island, though sometimes that does feel easier. Like Jesus Christ, you can find favor with God and man and yourself. We'll talk more about integration and sense of self later, but understand for now that maybe you haven't had the requisite differentiation in order to set you up as the diamond you are. A healthy person has integration and interdependency with others, and perhaps reintegration and redefining and remining of your diamond you, depending on where life feels like it has been stolen from you. So, you can do this one thing for today. Dig inside yourself to find those diamond characteristics and how they truly set you apart. And then shine on. There must be a me to have a we. My Truman Show. Get to the end of his world. That was the goal of Truman Burbank in The Truman Show movie of the 90s. Truman didn't know he was stuck, limited, and getting nowhere outside his constructed dome that represented his home. Sure, he attempted to escape to Fiji, but his fear of dogs, water, and change kept him on his self-contained but unknowingly manufactured island. Christoph, his god, who took him as an orphan baby and gave him new life inside a planned and staged bubble, ultimately wanted to keep Truman on his island for the TV-generated income found from outsiders following the life of Truman from infancy into adulthood. But Truman reached a point where he didn't care if he drowned in the waves, escaping beyond that limiting island he'd only ever known. Finally making it by boat to the edge of his world, the edge of the bubble stage, he turns to Christoph and the world and quips, "Good morning. Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night." Yes, he escapes his life that holds him back. And those of us who are watching that movie in real life, all just clap and cheer and think how wonderful it is that he's made it out of his bubble world. Well, I have sometimes felt like Truman held back by expectations of others that can create a bubble life for me. For decades, a part of me has chosen to feed that lifestyle, to let everyone else benefit from my living life, even though I might want a sabbatical to Fiji. Strangely, I didn't know I was on this island until I started seeing the signs that I was stuck in a bubble. So then I had to seek for and find steps to get out of this bubble. First, I had to recognize where fear kept me paralyzed. What would happen if I pushed the limits? As I experimented with no and self-care plans, I came to see the results weren't as disastrous as I feared. I next had to see where I cleaved to my old lifestyle, from the comfort I felt staying hidden at home to the people I assumed kept me stuck in that comfort zone for my own good. Then I had to venture into the new. New routes, paradigms, mistakes, people, opportunities, mindsets. Basically, I had to risk more than I had in order to find something greater. And I found that I'm way more risky than ever met the eye. I could push into the growth zone. I could find happiness while others also found it. I could challenge old opinions and debate my viewpoints, however archaic or misled from years of isolation from reality. And I simply could pick up my life, row my boat to the bubble wall, and issue to the world, "Good morning. Oh, and in case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night," as I opened the door to a new experience. Well, there's a deep fear inside that says, if I express my needs and have different needs than my spouse, I'm going to be abandoned. Also, he just won't like the real me. But ultimately, I must be seen to be customizable and knowable for true intimacy. Hence, I must be okay with myself to let those closest to me truly know me. I must have a sense of self, and I must be willing to receive, to be catered to be treated as something special, like that one-of-a-kind diamond. So I found 6 points to being a me. This was my beginnings of differentiation. And I can't say that this is a hard and set rule, but this was the process that I took. Number 1, a Bill of Rights. Number 2, boundaries. Number 3, detaching with love for individuation. 4, self-care. 5, self-love. 6, rock-solid connection with God. And the ultimate goal, I value and am true to both me and you, and allow you the same, you being my spouse. So let's start out. I'll explain each of these 6 points and what it meant to me. First of all, when you decide your Bill of Rights, where are your resentments, your frustrations, and your sadness? They may be hiding in validation, pride, vengeance, victimization. Just pay attention to what the vibration of those emotions is telling us that are coming up. And then enumerate what right you have in regards to those things. So, here is what my first Bill of Rights looked like. I couldn't believe I hadn't been allowing myself or others these things for me. I live in a free country after all. Well, I actually had a lot of fun writing this list. And this list I wrote for about a full page, maybe 20 or 30 things. And I'm like, wow, yes, I definitely have a right to these things. So here are 7 of those rights that I came up with that I had not been honoring. I have a right to feel welcome in my own home. I have a right to express my opinions. I have a right to be right. I have a right to be wrong. I have a right to be indulgent and high maintenance. I have a right to my own space. I have a right to self-care. I have a right to be grouchy. What are your Bill of Rights? If you haven't done this already, because I already challenged this to you in a previous class, but stop and write down your Bill of Rights, especially those that elicit an emotional response. Write it even if you think it's dumb or unimportant, just write it down. Get that stream of thought going to get those rights out. With those Bill of Rights, you are set up to begin instituting boundaries as a result of your rights you now insist on. I have to say that I had to have those Bill of Rights before I had any ground to set up any kind of boundaries. If I just all of a sudden said, well, I'm going to put forth this boundary and there was no water underneath it, nothing to hold it up, it just wouldn't have flown so well. I would have equivocated. I would have gone backwards again and say, oh, no, it's okay. I'll still just keep putting myself lower than everyone else, and I'll just keep forgiving, and I'll just keep apologizing. With these rights, I had to say, no, I have a place here too. And a problem that I see all over the place with people is that they think that boundaries mean I'm going to tell someone else what I require. But what it really is that boundaries are for, of, and about you, not what others must do for you. You can request things of them, but that's not boundaries. That's you getting to know each other more intimately. So here's the boundaries formula. When you, or I perceive that you, fill in the blank, I will, something actionable here, so that, fill in the blank. And again, this is my perception of things. Because what one person thinks, the other person may think, that's not a big deal, that's no boundary at all, who cares? But so for you, that perception needs to stick. For example, when you raise your voice, or I perceive that you have raised your voice, I will go somewhere else. Now notice, you're not saying the person who's raising their voice has to go somewhere else. You're saying, I will. This is something that I am doing for me, so that I can have peace. And again, this is my perception. So what my perception of peace is, or my perception of whatever's happening. So it's all about, for, and of me. The next step is, this one's a little tricky because I've got some kickback on this, but tell me what you think. Think about it for yourself, if you agree or what you think about this. This is detaching with love for individuation. Distance from your spouse may be necessary. Distance isn't selfish. Distance doesn't mean divorce is imminent. It gives much needed space to reconnect with God and self. This isn't disconnecting, but whatever the case, your spouse won't like it because you have been his right hand, so he likes the way it's been. Distance can mean grieving a relationship that is dying to be replaced by something glorious. Separation can happen within the house with defined acceptable divisions of separation, viewing your continuing marriage as a second start, from a new kind of dating to courtship of a better start, and on to further intimacy in adequate timing. True marital intimacy is enhanced by emotionally knowing. Detaching with love allows you the chance to rewrite the definition of intimacy. So, some experts say you should be able to not detach with love and stay connected while you heal. But it was like telling me to stay partway in a prison. You only have to come back on the odd days or something like that. I wanted to be done with this prison life. So with my personality, I needed a detaching. I felt like a rose blossoming bigger and bigger. I could still open more. Don't stop me now. Don't send me back into a bud. And then as you do this detaching with love, you need to keep in mind coping techniques to deal with a new life situation. You can't keep a pace of normalcy when you stop leaning heavily on each other. So some of the coping techniques that I used, first of all, a panic box. This is for when anxiety gets the best of you and things just are not going your way, because they won't, which is a collection of comforting items using the senses you can have on hand when things get tough mentally and you want to stay in handling of the present moment. That's the panic box. So what works for you there? Mantras. And my big one that I always go to that I love is found in Philippians in the Bible. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. And sometimes that means very little. All things may be only 2 things that I can do, but Christ is strengthening me to do it. Other coping techniques are prayer and other forms of worship. And a healthy support system is key. You have to reach out to people who will be on your side and support you, because you no longer have that other person that you're leaning against. And you need to have that support system. And it was so hard for me because I did not want to have to rely on anybody else. And I had to learn that other people were there as God's angels for me. Ultimately, detaching with love helps you seek for a thriving partnership, spotless before the altar of God, connecting intimately as He intended. The next point is self-care. Once you have set up your Bill of Rights and your boundaries, and you are able to detach with love, then you can actually start really taking care of yourself in the way that really works. So there's 2 parts to this equation of self-care. There are the must-haves. The must-haves are things that you have to do at least 3 of these things a day to be able to stay above the water. So for me, this is exercising in the sun, good nutrition, and I need some space and quiet on a daily basis. There are some other things that I can move to if I need to, if maybe these are not possible, but I have to have at least 3 must-haves. And a therapist taught me that one. And then the second thing is joy producers. You should have at least 1 joy producer a day. For me, this might be playing a musical instrument or singing through the house, doing an awesome puzzle. I like to gather with my family and just kind of kick back and talk about the day and joke and make play on words and just goofy things, and that produces joy. So you need to have at least 1 of those a day, because otherwise, what are you living for, right? I mean, you're living for some big thing that's going to happen in the future, like Christmas. No, let's make that joy every single day. So then the next point that you can have, once you have established that you have some rights, that you're able to put up your boundaries, that you have been able to detach with love, and that you have self-care going, is self-love. And you might say, well, this should come sooner, but it didn't for me. I had to kind of appeal to my sense of logic first before I could get into the emotion of knowing how to love myself. So I learned and continue to apply, and this will probably be a lifelong mission, 5 parts of self-love. First of all is self-compassion, treating me as I would others that I love. And this took me a while to figure out, because it was hard for me to see that I was putting so much attention to other people and then just being so mean to myself, which is the point number 2, self-forgiveness. Not being so hard on myself, and when I didn't do something the way I wanted to, forgiving myself and saying, you're okay, you're totally fine. You're just doing life. You are fine, you are good. 3 would be self-soothing, knowing how to make things okay again within myself. And sometimes that was just, you did a good job, because no one else was saying it, so I was going to say it to myself, and then I just pat myself on the back and go on with life. 4 would be shame identifying, and this one was so deep. And this one says, there is something wrong with me. And once you can identify the shame, then you can change it and just even say, I am human. So shame runs deep. And when you can identify it, your world takes on a different light. And then 5th is identifying truth, knowing what is true for me from good sources, and an inner knowing and a discernment. You don't need to reach outside yourself for these things. God has the power to give you a new heart, or really to just uncover the one that you have laid upon with life. The 6th step is an integration of all these steps, plus God. Rock solid connection with God. So look at it this way. You start at number 1 with the Bill of Rights. As offspring of God, I have a right to fill in the blank. And this puts a whole new perspective when you are considering yourself as offspring of God. Wow, those rights really do look pretty magnificent. Boundaries, number 2. recognize that God has many boundaries and it's totally okay for you to have boundaries too. When you fill in the blank, I will fill in the blank, so that ultimately the goal is I can keep God's Spirit with me. The third point, detach with love for individuation and creating secure connection to the greatest power source. Attach to God. Love God first. This is the first great commandment. To have no other gods before me. To take his name upon you. And it's really hard to know how to do this if you're still stuck into the energy of your husband. So if you can detach with love and attach to God, oh wow, what a difference that makes. And then self-care with God in sight means that it's the other side of loving your neighbor. So if you're loving your neighbor, then you need to also love yourself. So this is the second great commandment. And then also taking it upon yourself to have the agency to please oneself, to have joy. The bounty of the earth is yours. And I ask you a question. What if joy were a commandment? Because I believe it is. Fifth, self-love, self-compassion, self-forgiveness, identifying shame and truth in coming to God translates to bringing yourself closer to God so that you see the world through God's eyes. You know what is useful instead of just what is questionable. You know, is this thing useful? Not is it right, not is it something I should do, but it is actually something that is useful to you in your life. So the guilt can be useful. And when you use it right, then you are using God in that equation of trying to figure out what to do. Not living in fear, but with faith, hope, and charity. Serving God his way. And rock solid connection with God means that you understand his nature and how it defines you as his offspring and his divine spark. You understand and trust his love, his nature, his law, and your God's potential as it all defines you. And then you rinse and repeat over and over until this is a habit. So can you see how adding God to that mix just totally brings out new life and a new you, really? So here are the 6 things that I challenge you to do. I'm being kind of a strict taskmaster today because I believe you can do it. And once you even just get these into your head, then you'll start to do them without even thinking. So the 6 points, this is what I'd like you to do in your life. The Bill of Rights. Come up with a list of 7. You can do that in like 2 minutes. Boundaries. Use the boundary statement 1 time today. Detach with love. Decide if you need to attach to God first in your marriage. Maybe you don't, but man, I sure did. Even though I said I was 100% follower of Christ, I had put my spouse first. So sit back and really think about if you really are attached to God first. 4th, self-care. Do 3 must-haves and 1 joy item today. 5, self-love. Pick one of the 5 things and do it today. Self-compassion, self-forgiveness, self-soothing, identifying shame, or identifying a truth that you have not identified yet. This is part of self-love. And then 6th, a rock-solid God connection. This is the most important thing. This is the chance for you to pray to God about how you can be a me in order to be a we coming together with your spouse in marriage. So I encourage you to do those things. From David Schnarch, when you become your own person within a relationship, you leave room for someone else to do the same. Instead of depending on a partner to help you manage your own feelings and maintain your equilibrium, you are free to choose to be with your partner. You can offer your partner a hand instead of just your needs. Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Let's talk about sense of self. What does it mean to have a sense of self? Well, there are 12 points that I want to bring out that could define sense of self, but these are only some. There are more that I'd like you to figure out, and I will just share these 12 with you that have worked for me. So, first of all, you know your absolute value, your preferences, your similarities, and your uniqueness. You are okay with yourself amid the ups and downs. You are just as valuable as the next person. 2, you give grace to yourself, especially when you fail, and you have the grace to receive goodness. Being enough or not enough isn't the issue. It's knowing you can do what you set your mind to because of the self-love and rising above inevitable failures. Self-grace is key to a strong sense of self. 3, you can accept and respect others, knowing they aren't always their best self. And when you realize we're all just trying, you can accept and respect yourself more as well. 4th, your past does not define you. It refines you. You rise above inevitable failures and see how they shape you. Your past helps you recognize healthy limits and possibilities in many ways in life, which returns more strength to your spirit. 5th, you can express yourself effectively. You know your voice has power to build self and others. If you want to quickly assess where you lack a sense of self, notice where you hold back from expressing yourself, especially when you continually repress in one area. Expressing yourself does more for you than for anyone else. 6th, you share of yourself. You have much to give and offer to the world, having faith and hope that what you do makes a difference somewhere. Acknowledging a sense of contributing, of adding more than yourself alone, a cause and a power greater than your own. And when you cater to the greater good, you also shore up yourself. 7, you have sense of community, how we are all the same in some way. When you feel camaraderie, cohesiveness, shared purpose, and unity with others, you lift yourself and those around you. 8, you don't overvalue outside opinions. You see that what others think of you as their own business, based on their own past influences, experiences, environment, and so forth. What is one woman's trash is another woman's treasure. What one person thinks is horrible, another thinks is honorable. I like to think of it like this. If you have blonde hair and a person rudely tells you, "I don't like your purple hair," you probably won't be very offended because there is no truth to it. You don't have a drop of purple hair. If someone accuses you of something not true, or even if it is true, it's up to you to decide how it will affect you or not. And when you realize your and God's opinions matter most, all the others, both good and bad, have less impact on your view of self. 9th, you stop blame, shame, or unwarranted pride and expect miracles beyond you. You take accountability without taking weaknesses as a sign of having little worth, and you don't play the superiority game of having to be better than others. Your eye is single to God's glory, which becomes your glory through Him. 10th, you know your inner wisdom. You learn to intuit and trust your inner voice. Your inner knowing is best identified when you go against it. It feels like shooting an arrow that hits the bullseye and duds lamely to the ground. In your mind, you come to recognize it as, that wasn't the right thing to do, but ulterior reasons made me stick with it anyway. Why did I do that? When your actions, thoughts, and inner wisdom converge, you feel on fire, on top of things, and that everything is going your way, even when evidence might appear otherwise. Following your inner wisdom infinitely buoys up your sense of self. 11. You look for that divine spark in everyone around. As a result, you love others as yourself. You feel centered, full of light, spirit, and power. And you can be God's hands for others as you realize you share that divinity within just as they do. With your spiritual brothers and sisters all around you, you only hope for everyone's best, including your own. And the 12th one, you realize your divine heritage and that as offspring of heavenly parents, you have godly traits and characteristics filling you with infinite worth. So why would you worry about good enough of yourself or anyone else? It goes without saying because you're a chip off the old block, which fosters the possibility of a solid and super strong sense of self. So I'd like to give you a little writing assignment now. Write for 7 minutes about what it feels like to you to have a sense of self. This is a very powerful activity. And then I just ask you, what else would you add to the list of 12 points I gave? Like I said, there's others, and when I go make dinner tonight, I'll remember the next one too. So think of something else you would add to the list, and I'll see you in the next class. The empathy deception. Brené Brown covers empathy well. She explains how empathy fuels connection. She outlines 4 points of empathy. 1. Perspective taking, that another's perspective is their truth. 2. Staying out of judgment. 3. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that we recognize it. And 4. Feeling with people. As she explains in her video, Brené Brown on empathy, it's getting into the hole with the other person who is suffering instead of yelling down from above the hole. And she issues this statement about a crucial piece of having empathy. I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Empathy is about making something better through connection. But when does empathy become too much? When do you actually stand in the shoes of the other, forfeiting your own shoes? This is the empathy deception. As disciples of Jesus Christ, aren't we to mourn with those who mourn and comfort those who stand in need of comfort? But how do you do that without losing yourself? And especially in marriage, when you are so often with another, how easy is it to take on the feelings and emotions of someone you hope to connect with in a meaningful way? When I learned that I was over-empathizing with basically everyone in my life, my whole world changed. Let me tell you, there's a fine line between marriage and martyrdom, and few there be, it seems, that find the sweet spot. I well remember the day I had done some laundry, tossing jeans onto my bed to sort. As I evenly laid them across my bed, I froze incredulously. Which pants were mine and which were my husband's? They looked exactly the same, from the color to the cut to the style. Where he ended, I began. Where I began, he ended. Who was wearing the pants in this family? I looked at the tags and finally noticed the differences in length, he being 6 inches taller than me. Lesson learned. You are not your husband. If you can't tell whose pants are whose, and if you've become heartless, having lost that sparkle in your eye, you need to shop for new jeans. So now a word about different kinds of empathy. There is toxic empathy. Here are the traits of toxic empathy. This is a person who over-identifies with another person, taking on others' negative stuff as their own. This person feels drained, like there's no energy left to take care of self. This person struggles emotionally, financially, and relationally despite effort. They remain uncertain of personal values. They just believe as other people believe. And they mirror others, then start to absorb their stuff, the other person's stuff. And this is my observation. Kind of weird, but tell me if you've ever noticed this. People who are in toxic empathy begin to even look like each other. Even though there's the female and there's the male, they have the same nose, the same eyes, the same expressions, mannerisms, and so forth. I used to think it's cute when they kind of start to look like each other, but now I kind of think it's scary because they have totally taken on each other's emotions. And then another kind of empathy is super empathy. Super empathy was a new concept to me. The top two traits of super empathy is conscientiousness and a person who is responsible. These are both admirable traits. So it is kind of confusing when you realize these other things that are attached to it that will help you see where super empathy lies. So here are the other traits. This person is highly sensitive, more sensitive to light, smells, touch, movement, sounds, temperature than most. They're anxious in a room of people, overwhelmed around large groups of people. They're a great listener and a good problem solver. They're quick to feel what others feel, highly attuned to others' moods, both good and bad. They're able to sense what people are saying as not matching the information that they are speaking. They feel comfortable in, if not need, nature and the outdoors. They can't handle fake or negative people. They can feel like things are wrong all day long. They are calmed by water in the environment. They have an extra ability to connect well with other people. And when they feel threatened, they instead are helpful. The effects of over-empathizing are fairly simple. They fix, rescue, and control as a response to losing self through empathizing. This person tries to do the opposite of the healthy thing. They feel unappreciated and fearful, not respecting themselves and not having faith in themselves. They issue expectations of others, a cry from not being able to meet their own expectations for self. And they vacillate from inferior to superior to maintain control. Can you see this in your marriage? So here are 10 points of keeping in your own energy. And I don't love the word energy because when I first heard the word energy, I thought, well, isn't that like a unit of measurement of heat or whatever? But it's really an attitude or your personal space. But I'm just going to use the word energy, meaning that space that's around you that is technically yours. And with empathizing, we get out of our own energy and start to suck other people into our energy. And there's no border, there's no differentiation of their energy to our energy. So here are the 10 points. 1, seeing the difference of others in their energy and yours in your energy. Just even knowing there is a boundary of different energy between the two. Some people you jive with, I'd even say have a vortex with, and some whose energy is somewhat repulsive. Or some who has little effect on yours, or whose energy is pacifying or invigorating and so forth. That there is even an end to them and a beginning to you is the difference that we're seeing here. 2, go into nature. Nature is accepting, giving, and loving. Nature has no judgment, and it's rejuvenating and reliable. 3, go grounding, like sitting on grass or large rocks, feeling the earth beneath you. It's kind of like the electricity that needs to be grounded to not get out of control. When you're able to ground yourself, you can stay in your own energy. 4, knowing what you love, what lights your fire. You can really choose what you want, not what you're being affected by from others. 5, daily self-care. Those 3 must-haves and the 1 ridiculously happy thing. 6, knowing what's yours and what's not yours and saying it. This is not mine. So this is like even in the mob energy mindset, like with Hitler and the Nazis and the Jews. So it's also very helpful to know what's yours, to journal about what you're thinking and finding out what is yours, or have you taken on the energy of somebody else, like your spouse. 7, understanding your personality. Can I be okay with who I am as I am? Do I even know my own owner's manual and what makes me tick? What depletes me? What is really being true to me? No apologies, no excuses. Knowing some will love me for it and some will hate me for it. Think here, Jesus Christ. Some loved him and some killed him. 8, loving yourself. The biggest help for me is knowing I am a divine spark of God, made in his image and likeness, like I've already mentioned in the last class. What is there not to love about me, faults and all, when I love God and know I am just like him? Well, and eventually more like him. I'm imperfect now, but I am, like I said, the chip off the old block. So I naturally love myself, and when I do, I stay in my own vitality because I am honoring myself. 9, guidance from the Holy Spirit to keep me in my space, in a good space, and sometimes not, but having the burdens lifted from my shoulders in those times. The Holy Ghost can tell me all things or guide me to the things that can. And 10th, honoring and seeing the differences in both of us, accepting others for who they are without trying to change them, without having to change you, appreciating what is different and unique and similar. But if you do share similar things, not getting so caught up in it that you are overly agreeable and overly empathizing. Having a say in what's yours and allowing others this exactly same thing, and still loving them. So now, what differentiation with empathy looks like. In conflict, a differentiated lover can give space to their partner who is emotionally overwhelmed while also remaining close enough to be caring and supportive, but not so close that they lose themselves emotionally. Can you tell me more about what's going on? Can you tell me about these feelings? This requires being authentic with your feelings and needs. When both partners are whole, not only is there more flexibility in the marriage, but there is also more intimacy. That is from Ellen Bader, an interview on Gottman.com. Don't let empathy get the best of you. Remember, you are incredibly valuable too. So here's some homework, and I hope you have fun with this. I've done this a few times, and it's been fun every single time, because it's all about you. So draw a picture of yourself with words of all the characteristics you really are or want to see more of. I've started you off with a few suggestions: loving, grounded, kind, and inspired. Look at this drawing that you stick these words on often, and add to this often. I think you'll really love and enjoy this assignment. Marriage serves as an opportunity for knocking off the edges and becoming refined like a precious diamond. Things worth having require time and attention. And integration. I believe that part of the differentiation dynamic is integration. After the individuation, the coming together in marriage. This is collaboration, unification, consolidation. That the two parts coming together are greater together because they are stronger unto themselves. As we finish up here, I'd like you to ponder. I've heard professional researchers claim these contrasting statements. We only marry people as emotionally healthy or damaged as we are, versus when one goes down, you both don't have to go down. Which feels like truth to you? I believe as you grow stronger yourself, you make both members of a marriage better as higher versions of yourself. Converting your whole self, coming to yourself, is a metamorphical process born of understanding differentiation and individuation, balanced empathy, a sense of self, and a more promising integration with two whole people converging and integrating to create something wonderful. Thanks for sharing this journey of differentiation with me. I hope you can appreciate your own growing butterfly, spreading your wings to fly high.
Meditation, the butterfly. Think of the story of Alice in Wonderland. Alice is a simple girl with a big mind. She meets many friends and creatures on her journey to her ultimate duel against the vicious Jabberwocky dragon. One of her caterpillar friends, the wise Absalom, advises her along the way, encouraging her to remember who she really is. Creatures she didn't recognize certainly recognize her, though they say she isn't fully yet herself, the real Alice. As her friend the Mad Hatter insists, Alice wasn't the mostest Alice until her tenacity finally appeared. The things she most feared became her greatest assets. Though at first she has no desire to face her dragon, as the story unfolds, she realizes she is the captain of her dream, and she can use whatever resources or characters she needs to her advantage. She faces and defeats her Jabberwocky. Her dear Absalom caterpillar friend disappears into the numbness of his enveloped cocoon as he grows into a beautiful butterfly with wings for action, beauty, and shine. His wisdom takes new flight with more ground to cover than ever before, and Alice figuratively spreads her wings and flies to new heights as she conquers fears and attracts what she desires. So I want you to now envision your life cushioned by your own comfortable cocoon. Let's say your cocoon sits at the base of your spine, the area of the tailbone. The spine is your lifeline and is energetically mapped with all the organs and systems of your body. So it follows that the emerging you would travel up the spine as it gathers strength and resilience. As your morphing caterpillar climbs higher, it begins to break out of its bindings. It pulls its wings out such that they now cover your shoulder blades. Like the warmth of a cozy purple-gold blanket, the wings enshroud your shoulders and wrap around your front, melding together at your sternum as would a cloak. It continues its amorphosis, ascending up your bodice until it blends together the front and back at the neck to create a tall collar of sorts. You now realize you wear the royal robe of a queen. Your butterfly wings flutter with first-time appraisal as they reach out wide and far. There is no going back now. Your cocoon will no longer hold your eminence. You can only aspire to greater levels now. So ask yourself, where does this place you in the race for your dreams? You can no longer hunker down without the wings getting in the way or getting stepped upon. You can choose to remain in the flower garden, flitting from one perch to another. Or you can do as the great monarchs, spanning one country to the next as they seek their highest aspirations. You can choose to spread your wings and shine, to travel distances only once a wish. And the Lord of your existence sanctions your heightened flourishing. When your Alice opens, how will you respond? What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the master calls the butterfly.